Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Trends Research and Advisory, I am pleased to welcome you to the 10th Strategic Dialogue hosted by our Moscow's office. Today's session addresses a critical and timely topic, the Russian vision of the war in the Middle East and its regional and international repercussions. We are honored to host distinguished experts joining us today. I would like to begin by inviting Mr. Ali Al-Ali, Head of Device Sector, to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 10th edition of Trends Strategic Dialogue. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session titled The Russian Vision of the War in the Middle East and its Regional and International Repercussions. This session is very important because of the ongoing war in the Middle East is affecting regional safety, international relationship, and global energy supplies. Today's discussion will examine how Russia views this crisis, how it's defined its role, and how its position may influence the wider regional and international landscape. Our discussion will focus on three main themes. First, we will address the Russian position on the war in the Middle East, specifically the balance between conflict management and the push toward political and diplomatic dialogues. Second, we will examine the future of Russia-Gulf relations in the post-war phase, with attention to how this crisis may affect Russia's engagement with key Gulf states and regional security arrangements. Third, we will examine how this war affects oil markets, including short-term price increases and long-term need for stability and sustainable energy. We hope this session will provide useful insight and better understanding of Russia's approach and its broader impact. With that, we may now begin our session. I will now hand over the mic to my colleague Abrar Al-Ali to moderate today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Nikolai, Professor of the Middle Eastern Studies, to share his perspective.
Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. Let me start with this current military crisis around Iran. The Russian leadership has tried to maintain a neutral position. This approach is not about distancing itself from the region. It is driven for the structure of Russia's interests in the Middle East. Russia is connected with Iran through political, transport, energy, and military technical ties. At the same time, it has a strong interest in stable relations with the Gulf countries, especially in oil market coordination, investment cooperation, and regional diplomacy. In this context, taking sides would create direct risks for the entire system of Russia relationship in the region. From Moscow perspective, the conflict has several layers of importance. The first layer is regional security. Any escalation affects Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, the Gulf itself, and key maritime routes. The second layer is the global economy. Strikes on energy infrastructure, rising risks for shipping, and uncertainty about oil supply immediately influence prices, insurance costs, logistics, and fiscal planning for producer states, as Russia also. The third layer is international politics. The conflict is seen as part of the broader transformation of the global order, where regional crises are increasingly linked to the competition between major states or major powers. In practical terms, Russia's policy is built around the clear objective to preserve working channels with all key actors and to prevent a situation where escalation destroys existing mechanism of cooperation. This is especially important in the energy sector. OPEC Plus remains Russia's main institutional channel of engagement with the Gulf. Through this framework, Moscow interacts with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other producers on issues that have direct fiscal importance. Oil coordination, Oil coordination affects revenues, investment expectations, and the stability of export models. For Russia, instability in the Gulf is therefore not only a diplomatic challenge, but also an economic risk. In this context, Russia's calls for the de-escalation have a practical meaning. They are aimed at preserving a predictable environment for oil markets, transport routes, and financial operations. Moscow understands that a large-scale conflict around Iran could affect the Strait of Hormuz, ports, refineries, gas infrastructure, and even facilities linked to U.S. military presence in the Gulf. For the region, this would be treating an economical model based on secure infrastructure, investor confidence, and the stable exports. At the same time, Russia doesn't have capabilities comparable to the US military infrastructure in the Gulf. The regional security system has been built over decades around American bases, common systems, intelligence, air defense, and operational integration. This structure remains in place, even as Gulf states seek greater autonomy and more predictable arrangements. They may revise terms of the engagement with Washington, but the core architecture of security remains unchanged. This defines the scope of Russia's role. In the current configuration, Russia can be a relevant partner in specific areas, including energy, diplomacy, finance, logistics, and selected industrial projects. It can help maintain communication channels with Iran, contribute to discussions on de-escalation, support oil market coordination, and offer targeted infrastructure or energy solutions. However, it cannot take on the role of a primary security provider in the Gulf. That role requires a permanent military presence, a system of alliances, and the scale of resources that Russia doesn't have in the region. A more important shift is taking place within the Gulf itself. Countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are no longer relying only on external guarantees. They are actively developing their own defense capabilities, air defense systems, counter-drone technologies, national defense industries, and technological partnerships. This is a response to several factors: vulnerability of infrastructure, doubts about external protection, and experience of attacks, and the rising cost of security. This shift changes the rules of engagement for external parties or partners. In the past, cooperation often focused on arms sales, political agreements, and energy deals. Today, Gulf countries increasingly demand local production, technology transfer, joint ventures, and workforce development. This applies not only to defense, but also to energy, logistics, industry, digital systems, food security, and critical infrastructure management. For Russia, this creates both opportunities and constraints. Opportunities remain in areas where Russian capabilities match existing regional demand. These include oil coordination, energy projects, nuclear technologies, fertilizers, food supplies, transport corridors, and certain financial mechanisms. Constraints appear in sectors that require large-scale capital, deep technological integration, and long-term industrial presence. In these areas, Russia faces strong competition from the United States, Europe, China, South Korea, and Turkey. The case of the UAE is especially important. For the Emirates, the conflict around Iran is not only a security issue, it is also a challenge to their development model. The UAE functions as a financial, logistical, and investment hub for the region, and for Russia also. Its stability depends on its reputation as a safe and reliable platform for capital, trade, and global business. Any threat to ports, airport, energy facilities, banking operations, or shipping insurance directly affects the model. From this perspective, the key question for the Emirati audience is practical. Does Russia contribute to stability or does it add risk? Russia's neutral approach can be seen as an attempt to prevent further escalation. Moscow has no interest in disrupting the economic channels that connect it with the Gulf. It also has no interest in aligning its regional policy fully with the logic of confrontation around Iran. Russia's access to Tehran can be an asset only if it helps reduce tensions and maintain communications. If it is seen as dependence, it will reduce trust in Russia as an independent partner. This leads to a central task for Russian policy to maintain relations with Iran without allowing them to limit dialogue with the Gulf states. This requires careful diplomacy and clear signaling. Russia needs to demonstrate that its ties with Iran are not directed against the Gulf and can be used to prevent dangerous scenarios. Looking ahead, in a post-conflict phase, Gulf states are likely to adjust their approach to security and the partnership. The most likely outcome is a model where the US remains the main security provider, while regional states increase their autonomy. They will also expand ties with China, Russia, Turkey, South Korea, India, and Europe. The system will become more complex and more selective. Each partner will be evaluated based on the specific value it brings. For Russia, it means a shift from a symbolic presence to practical relevance. Visits and statements will matter less if they are not supported by concrete mechanism, financial channels, investments, supply chains, technologies, logistics, energy cooperation, and participation in industrial processes. Gulf states have capital and rising expectations. They will choose partners based on measurable benefits and manageable risks. OPEC Plus remains the most stable channel for Russia. It provides regular engagement with Saudi Arabia and other producers and creates a shared economic agenda linked to revenues and market expectations. As long as the mechanism functions, Russia maintains a meaningful role in regional energy policy. Beyond that, cooperation will depend on the quality of projects. Energy and infrastructure proposals must be transparent, financially viable, and resilient to external pressures. Investors in the Gulf will focus on returns and risk management. Political alignments alone is not sufficient. Industrial cooperation will also require adjustment. The region is moving towards localization and capability building. To remain relevant, Russia will need to offer joint productions, training, service support, and long-term engagement. Finally, Russia can play a role in crisis diplomacy, especially where communications with difficult actors is needed. But this role will be judged by outcomes. For Gulf states, the key measure is whether such engagement reduces a risk to infrastructure, trade, and internal stability. In conclusion, Russia's vision of the conflict around Iran is shaped by the understanding that regional escalation directly affects economic mechanisms that are crucial for both Russia and the Gulf. Its strategy is to maintain neutrality, preserve dialogue, and protect existing frameworks of cooperation. For the Gulf, the question is practical. Can Russia be a useful partner in a system where regional states are becoming more autonomous, while security still relies on the United States? The answer depends on whether Russia can provide concrete economic value, support energy coordination, engage in viable projects, work with the Gulf capital on clear terms, and use its regional connections to reduce risks. In today's Middle East, influence is measured not by political statements, but by their ability to deliver practical solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. You highlighted that Russia adopts a carefully balanced approach, combining a strong legal condemnation of military actions, political support for Iran, and at the same time, avoiding direct military involvement. And my question is, how sustainable is this balancing strategy in the long term, especially if the conflicts escalate further? And what are the potential limits of Russia's ability to maintain neutrality while preserving its strategic relationship with both Iran and the Gulf states?
Indeed, it's a very difficult task to keep neutrality and to keep balancing between different tasks and different goals. First is to maintain the good relations with the Gulf countries and to maintain the good economic and political and military relations with Iran, which Russia has a strategic agreement with. Okay, from the last year. It's clear that Russia doesn't supply weapons to Iran because all Russian weapons are concentrated on the other front in Ukraine. So Russia helps Iran only through the food supply, grain, first of all, some humanitarian aid, and also political support on the level of the United States nations. As I mentioned, Russia continued to maintain good relations with all Gulf states because it's very sensitive for Russian business and Russian even government budget to make business through Gulf states. It's not only the window opened for Russian funds and economics to the Gulf itself. It's also the window to the outer world. So your question was, would Russia keep this balance? It's our leadership will do its best to continue and to be involved in the de-escalation and in the negotiations, peace negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your valuable insights. We now move to our next speaker, Dr. Anton from the Valdai Discussion Club. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me here today. Well, it's really difficult to add value to this conversation after the presentation by Dr. Nikolai, who is a brilliant specialist on the Middle East, but I will still try to make a few points to summarize where we stand now and to do it from a broader international relations perspective. Well, I'd like to first address a widely held view that Russia stands to gain from this conflict, even indirectly. This view is, those who hold this view, they cite two principal reasons to say that Russia is an indirect beneficiary of this conflict. First is that Russia has benefited from the sharp spike in oil prices, which is clearly giving its extra revenue. Second is that the United States operation against Iran has diverted Washington's attention even further from Europe, thus aligning with Moscow's strategic interests. While both points hold partly true, there are serious limitations. First, the oil prices. It's evident that it is not a permanent fix, but only a temporary volatility. And it doesn't change the long-term challenges that Russia faces in the energy markets related to the global reshaping of the oil and gas markets, with the fierce competition with the United States for these markets, with the restrictions imposed by the West against Russian energy exports, and so on. Finally, we'll have the Strait of Hormuz opened someday, and we can face the oversupply as a result. So short term, yes, it does give certain benefits. But as Professor Nikolai explained, the challenges and the dangers much exceed those short terms what we are facing now. Regarding the second point, well, it deserves closer scrutiny because for Russia, the current presidential administration in the United States, President Trump and some members of his team are seen as credible partners to discuss European matters. So the theater which is the most crucial for Russia. And the fear, there is a perception that this whole situation can weaken Trump's positions both domestically and internationally. So we can see that the military operation against Iran has generated significant risks for Trump in terms of how it alienated important segments of his domestic support base. Many of these people are urging a renewed focus on America's internal challenges, and there is a visible backlash within MAGA circles, particularly from isolationist forces who view the operation in Iran as the violation of the America First principles and a departure from Trump's earlier pledge of no new wars. Polls indicate broad disapproval of Trump's handling of the Iran situation, with notable splits within his base and growing frustration over rising gas prices. In addition, many of Trump's supporters in Europe, particularly in Central European countries, the so-called sovereignist forces, they're growing increasingly skeptical about Trump. And finally, we have NATO. It's a separate issue because President Trump has expressed his frustration over the failure of his European NATO allies to support his position on the Iran conflict. And you have heard threats against Spain, for example, and other vocal critics of this operation. So in the short term, it might seem that more infighting within NATO would be beneficial to Russia, but also there is a different risk because such a rift within the transatlantic alliance may prompt a real reconceptualization of NATO, in which the more assertive and aggressive European voices may take the primary role, and the risks this situation carries are evident. So let's now move to the Middle East itself, where countries facing the multiple challenges arising from this confrontation are rethinking their strategic positioning. We have seen that Israel has reasserted itself as the preeminent military power, and the centrality of the US-Israel axis will continue to influence the long-term calculations of all regional actors. But while Middle Eastern states continue to maintain their core strategic alliances with the United States, as Professor Nicolai has pointed out, they have no alternatives, but they're increasingly looking to creating, to expanding their space for strategic autonomy. This is a topic that we have studied extensively in our Valdai Trends collaboration, and which we'll continue to study, because the strategic autonomy in the Middle East is, a new phenomenon, and apart from the developments such as bolstering deterrence capacities from some Middle Eastern states, we can see a different kind of developments, of attempts to try to formulate an inclusive security architecture in the Middle East. Maybe at first as regional blocks, but maybe later encompassing more and more states. This is something that Russia has advocated for many years. And maybe this situation brings us a bit closer to such a regional framework. Well, one of the most troubling consequences already mentioned of this conflict is the heightened risk to the Gulf states' reputation as a safe haven in a very turbulent region, something that Russia values very much. So in addition to direct strikes on oil and gas infrastructure and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which have disrupted the key energy sector, sectors such as aviation, banking, shipping, tourism, and others have suffered significant damage. And it is safe to say that the post-war Middle East will look markedly different. So in conclusion, as we look at the situation right now, it resembles a strategic impasse with no clear solutions in sight, and where negotiations can at best offer a temporary pause before the next escalation. But at the same time, if we look from a broader perspective, these developments represent a major stage in a broader realignment of power in the world. And this is something we should look at and study with more and more scrutiny. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. But Dr. Anton, do you see Russia's role evolving towards crisis management more, or could it realistically expand into an active mediation between the key parties?
I think it all depends on the demand on such mediation. We have seen that the role of Pakistan is very interesting, that it stepped in and it does a lot of mediation efforts. We don't know what they will result in, but they are using this leverage to promote crisis resolution. And crisis resolution is, of course, the objective for Russia too. So nobody needs a permanent crisis involving the Gulf at this time. So I think even those who did their best to cause this eruption in the conflict would like to walk out of this conflict as soon as possible, because the costs that all the countries in the world, including the major powers, the extra-regional powers, are really high. So I believe Russia's mediation efforts will be offered as soon as there is real demand on them.
Thank you, Dr. Anton, for your insightful remarks. We now move to our next speaker, Mr. Abdullah Al-Khaja, a senior researcher. Welcome, Abdullah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's my pleasure being here with Dr. Nikolai and Dr. Antoine. Your perspectives, of course, overlap when it comes to maybe 3 points, I would say, which are, of course, Russia's role as a potential mediator or wanting to mediate tensions that are happening here in the Gulf. The second being, of course, how to decrease the level of conflict and reach a stable point that ensures that all markets are at a stable point, especially energy markets. And lastly, of course, is how do we preserve Russia's role in the post-war Middle East, especially with its relations when it comes to the Gulf states. Building on first, let's say, the economic side of it, and your mention of the Strait of Hormuz and how the energy markets, of course, are currently in fluctuations with prices going up and down every other day, depending on what comes out of the American administration. Bloomberg, of course, has reported that Russian oil has averaged over 106 barrels per $106 per barrel just this month. So people might assume that, oh, Russia is a big beneficiary, as you mentioned, indirectly in terms of what is happening in the Middle East. But at the same time, these gains are not cost-free. With the International Energy Agency estimating in its this month's oil market report that we are witnessing a historic supply shock, especially when the global supply is falling by 10.1 million barrels per day. Just last month, of course, due to attacks on Gulf energy infrastructures and restrictions when it comes to the movements through the strait. This, of course, creates sort of a paradox, you could say. On one hand, these higher prices do provide fiscal benefits to oil producers, especially Russia, but at the same time, they do have prolonged disruption risks and demand risk disruption, especially as more countries are seeking to diversify away from oil, as well as looking at what is the future of maybe OPEC Plus in terms of the Gulf states' future with Russia. Maybe pointing towards a Reuters commentary that I read yesterday, it notes that the crisis may strengthen at this point the US's role as an energy shock absorber through increased exports, flexible sanctions, and of course the use of strategic reserves. When looking at flexible sanctions, one note will be, of course, earlier in the conflict when the US Treasury allowed for Russian oil to be bought by India without any repercussions, backing off of their previous statements of putting more tariffs, you could say, on India for that as a punishment. So in short, when it comes to economic point, we could say that Russia, of course, benefits, but is not looking forward to an unstable energy market and a future that is, as we mentioned, not really clear. Looking at it from a diplomatic perspective, as Russia's role, Russia has been, of course, very clear since the start of this conflict that it is calling for mediation, de-escalation, and a return to negotiations rather than military conflict that started by the US and Israel. And this is most evident, I could say, by the visit of Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi yesterday to President Vladimir Putin. in which, of course, and I quote President Putin, "For our part, we will do everything that serves your interests and the interests of all the people of the region to ensure that peace is achieved as quickly as possible." This shows that, of course, there is a posture that reflects an effort to ensure that regional stability for all players is achieved and not just a one-sided benefit to maybe, in this case, Iran with that visit, and to, of course, have Russia be positioned as a key player in the post-war regional order. At the same time, this is not just a rhetorical approach, but Moscow is opening channels not just with Iran, but other regional players, being, of course, Pakistan and China, and, of course, Oman, which reflects a greater role when it comes to its participation here in the Middle East. And somewhat, we could say, when it comes to the collaboration between us and Valdai in our paper, is that strategic autonomy, of course, is being very prevalent when it comes to the Middle Eastern countries, of course, the Gulf states in this case, and how external penetration by great powers is not that effective in more recent terms, especially the move away from, we could say, external dependencies on defense, with, of course, the Gulf states creating or establishing their own defense industries with capabilities. And what we've seen is, of course, innovation in how they use these military equipment, especially with the UAE, of course, armed forces using the Apache helicopters to shoot down Shahid drones, first in, of course, history, as well as showed its capabilities. Of course, the economy, the regional economy, I would say, is, of course, taken a hit by, as you mentioned, the reputation of it being a safe haven. But I think that we will, of course, bounce back from that stronger. And also, this showcased that, of course, there are some, we could say, infrastructural casualties, but at the same time, those can be amended and those can be brought back into full function with time.
Abdullah, given Russia's deepening strategic partnership with Iran, and including political and economic coordination, alongside its expanding energy and economic ties with Gulf states, how can Moscow particularly position itself as a credible and trusted partner to the Gulf in the post-war phase without being perceived as overly aligned with Tehran?
So when it comes to, of course, its relationships with the Gulf states in the post-war setting, we could say that Russia is already a strong ally to, of course, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, as well as the other Gulf states, when it comes to diplomatic as well as economic being at the forefront of it. The Gulf states, of course, also have their role in how they want to balance this approach. They don't want to overly depend on one power while pushing the other to the side, more so strategic hedging, as well as being autonomous actors of their own. What we're seeing today in the Middle East is, of course, a reshaping of the regional power structure, you could say, with Israel, Iran, as well as the Gulf states playing a role in how the future of it will look like. This, of course, is with the objective of being a regional hegemon, not so much being limited to those states, but also external powers. But of course, in practice, when it comes to, of course, great powers trying to penetrate into another region, it is, to say the least, limited, especially with having to put costs upfront. As mentioned, the US, of course, over decades of being present here in the Middle East, has invested billions of dollars into their military bases, their military presence here in the Gulf, and it would be unwise for a nation such as Russia to just pour that much money into it while such a presence exists, and would not yield any positive results in that as that matter. It would be more beneficial for them to still, of course, put economy or put the economic aspect of this relationship at the forefront, while still prioritizing, of course, walking on this thin line of having relations, of course, with Iran and having relations with its Middle Eastern partners. So I would say that this relationship is not going anywhere in terms of disappearing anytime soon. And on the contrary, I would say this non-interventionism by Russia, by not directly coming into the war, whether it be through military conflict or otherwise, is a smart move on its choice to ensure that it is a neutral party in all of this. That is, of course, preaching for diplomacy and mediation as its foremost approach.
Thank you very much, Abdullah, for your remarks and insights. And as we come to the end of the session, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all our distinguished speakers and for their insights and thought-provoking contributions. Today's discussion has offered valuable perspectives on the evolving dynamic of the Middle East and Russia's role within it, particularly in navigating complex regional relationships and global implications. I'd like to thank our audience for their time, and on behalf of the Trends Research and Advisory, thank you all for joining us in this 10th Strategic Dialogue. We look forward to welcoming you again to future sessions, and thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
مع السلامة.
Assalam.